Detectives, what horrifying case made you quit your job forever? In all my years working as a detective, I've never worked on a more disturbing case than this. It all started when my partner Conley and I were called in to investigate an attack on a beach volleyball tournament on the city's largest beach. There was a national tournament with over 300 teams playing on 50 courts over the course of the weekend. During one morning's warm-ups before the first game on the first day, one ear-piercing scream turned into 2 screams, which quickly turned into 100 screams. Suddenly, over 1/3 of the players needed immediate medical attention. Their feet, ankles, knees, thighs, hips, stomachs, and in some cases up to their shoulders and face were covered in deep, gushing cuts. Someone had gone to the beach the night before the tournament and brought hundreds of small, flat pieces of wood with razor blades sticking up from the centers in an upside-down capital T shape. The wood was dug into the sand, with the blade sharp ends pointed upward, and hidden just under the surface so no one could see them. It must have taken hours to set up. There were no deaths, but the damage that was caused resulted in hundreds of injuries and several dozen athletic young adults with sliced Achilles tendons and a dwindling future in sports. As with every investigation, we started off at the crime scene and worked our way outwards in tight, concentric circles. While the CSIs were combing the beach, Connolly and I were interviewing the people who ran the tournament, looking for any enemies or people who might want to target them in this tournament in particular. But those led nowhere. Sadly, the CSIs fared no better. The entire crime scene was awash. There were so many footprints and shoe and sandal prints in the sand it was impossible to search for tracks. And the actual razor blades and pieces of wood had been doused in bleach before being placed in their small dugouts. There were no security cameras on the beach, and the one camera in the parking lot didn't capture any cars between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m. Our phones were ringing off the hook with tips, but there were no real leads. After a month, we were nowhere in the investigation. But the case didn't end there. Not long after, at a senior home along the city's waterfront, a fire had started in the basement. Because of the accelerants used, it quickly overtook the first 2 floors. From there, the rest of the 8-story building went up. 22 residents and 9 staff died in the fire, all from smoke inhalation. We scoured the undamaged security footage, but again found no suspects around the parking lots or front entrances. The footage from the rear of the building was destroyed, so we couldn't check it. Not even a week later, there was a mass poisoning in a junior high school cafeteria. There were 23 deaths, 15 of which were students, and over 100 severe injuries. Crimes like this don't just regularly happen. Somebody was trying to make a point. Our investigation showed that someone had stealthily broken into the school overnight and poisoned every piece of food in the cafeteria's stockroom, fridge and freezer with arsenic. It was a miracle more people didn't die. All the school's exterior cameras were working, and after scouring them for clues, we finally found one at the back doors. The footage captured someone dressed in all black with a hood and ski mask over his face. He'd used a small set of locked picking tools to enter the back door which led to the kitchen. He used the same door to exit and ran off across the soccer field towards water. And suddenly everything clicked, an array of cases all leading us to the exact same conclusion. The beach volleyball courts, the seniors' home, and now this junior high. They all backed out onto the water. We marked all 3 locations on a map and scanned down the coast for all the marinas and harbors. Then we went back through all the routes and picked out various waterfront hotspots we knew would have footed to their exteriors. Using the dates of the 3 incidents, we checked the footage to try to find any repeat boats on the nights in question. We watched a lot of footage. There was only one boat that stood out. A large, older black speedboat was being driven by a lone individual we couldn't make out the details of. A red light glowed from inside the cabin. Connolly and I got pictures of the boat printed and went back to check the marinas and harbors. None of the docks we went to had seen the particular boat or our records of it, which made us think it was docking at a private residence. I spoke to one of my friends in narcotics named Waco, and he brought up the substance boats that had been populating the cove near the last dock we visited. It turned out that the many substance users in our city had been moving away from alleyways and SROs and onto small dinghies and substance boats, turning them into floating pill houses. The boats were harder for cops to break up or investigate, and you could float in the cove or out in the nearby channel for up to 6 months before having to vacate. Of course, the 6-month rule was never enforced, so the cove kept getting busier with more and more substance boats. Waco offered to help. He went in one night and made his way around the 30 or so boats which were loosely tied together. Waco found our black boat. He learned the owner was a guy people call Red. He was a dealer and let people use and pass out aboard his boat afterwards. The next night, Waco went back and we followed from a distance with the Coast Guard. We had Waco wired so we could hear everything on board. His plan was to get on with a few others to buy and use some substance, then pass out. He would fake the shooting up part and pretend to fall asleep. Connolly and I listened in, hearing the details of the casual conversations going on with the other users as they bought and started prep. Soon enough, all the voices went quiet, including Waco's. A rough, agitated voice called out, asking if anyone was awake. There was no response. The voice, belonging to Red, laughed and said good. We heard some shuffling, then the engine on the boat revved into gear. The boat peeled out, leaving the cove behind. Waco had a GPS tracker in his shoe, so Connolly and I watched the boat on monitors and headed out to sea. We followed from a distance. The Coast Guard's lights all turned off and went completely stealth. Connolly and I continued listening in. After several minutes, the engine died down. There were sounds of chains rustling, then clanking together. Waco's voice came over the mic in a hushed and frantic whisper. He's chaining us together. There's an anvil on one end. Our captain flipped the lights and sirens on, and the boat gunned it towards the blip on our radar. Over the mic, we heard Red notice the sirens. He started to panic, and from what Waco told us was about to toss the anvil over the side. But Waco was now up and ready to fight. He pulled the same chain that was attached to the anvil, hitting Red from behind and knocking him to his knees. A fight on the boat ensued, and Waco put him in a chokehold. The boat arrived just as Waco managed to subdue Red. When we jumped on the boat, we found them panting heavily, grappling on the deck, the anvil perilously close to the edge. As we handcuffed Red and helped Waco up, I couldn't help but stare at the monster we had caught. This was the man who had caused such monstrous atrocities, but there was something unnerving about him. His face was oddly familiar, and then it hit me. Red was one of our own, a forensic specialist from our department. His real name was Robert, the same man who'd combed the beach, the same man who'd analyzed the burned-down senior home, the same man who'd gone over the school's security footage. He was the insider, helping us solve the crime scene himself, committed, leading us on a wild goose chase while staying safely under the radar. I was answered by silence as he continued to look out into the horizon while calmly put the handcuffs on. But as we started to take him into custody, a maniacal grin stretched across his face. Suddenly, Red lunged forward, knocking Waco into Conley and me, sending us sprawling. With a swift movement, he threw himself over the edge of the boat, the chained anvil following him into the dark depths below. The sea swallowed him, the man who was a friend, a colleague, and a ruthless killer before we could even react. And just like that, he was gone. But the most unnerving part, when we later brought our search team, his body was nowhere to be found on the ocean floor.